Attribution time. Michael, thanks for being on today.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Um, as everyone that I've talked to on Attribute, I was listening back to some of them, just reminiscing, and every time I start with, we met on LinkedIn, and that's the case. So LinkedIn has been great.
Absolutely.
It's doing what it's designed to do, and to network and to grow. And I'm thankful for that. So appreciate you connecting with me. And we had a good conversation around what you're doing with Lassoo, the kind of the history, what built up to that, and data collection and your history. You have a fun history of what attribution looks like. So today's conversation is going to be a good one. But yeah, let's dive into it. So let's actually start with what happened in the past, right? Let's talk kind of about your journey, because I thought that was really fascinating, and where you were, what you were working on, where you're at now. So let's let the listeners kind of hear that, because I think it's a really cool story.
Sure. So, I mean, if we go pretty far back, we had built a SaaS application, product lifecycle management space, helping manufacturers and so forth roll out product. Sold out to Autodesk. Decided when we left that we were going to go back into a different space, start something new. And our initial challenge that we sort of identified was the ability to sort of understand user behavior. So we started this journey really on behavioral data collection. So what people are doing in an app, on a website, and so forth. And as we rolled that out, we'll skip a bunch of years just to kind of get into the meat. We were working within the H&R Block tax application and really helping them understand sort of the customer journey within the application. So more on the product analytics side, where to throw out paywalls, how do we optimize the experience? If somebody does these or submits these types of tax forms, should we reach out to them with more of a consultative, hey, you might have some challenges here, maybe we can help. So their tax advisory service. And that was great. And we really helped them understand that usage. But what ended up happening was marketing was spending so much money to get people into these tax applications that they'd go out and say, well, okay, these people, let's say 20% of the people ended up paying for a service. It was a free service, the tax application. Well, how is our investment in all this different media and effort translating into those sales? So now we start talking to the marketing folks, and the concept of attribution is introduced to us. And that was where the shift from behavioral data, or maybe not a shift, but the complementary part of the marketing data and the behavioral data sort of came to our minds, and how those things work together. And then based on that, started to build out a solution targeting multi-touch attribution. The model that we rolled out within our tool TrialFire was a collaborative game theory model. We looked at a few different models back in those days, Markov chains, collaborative game theory, and so forth, and settled on that as the solution that we thought was the best.
The best, yeah.
The best for that case.
I love talking to people that are smarter than me. That would be you, because I don't even get into that realm, right? Like, there's people that build these systems like yourself that have all this knowledge of, like, okay, how do we run these numbers against these different theories? And I think it's fascinating. It's so cool to me. I admire it. But and so what I want to talk about is, you mentioned the behavioral data, or like the what was going on, and then trying to bring that back to the marketing information. And there's a, whether you know it or not, like, you purposely made a distinction between the two, right? And so I think that's really interesting, because as marketers, so often we think they're the same, right? We think we have this magical wand, the power that be, that if we threw this Google ad at you, that this will change your behavior in some capacity, right? That's the big challenge, or that's why people, I think, often like self-reported attribution. I'm on the fence about it. It could go one way or the other, but it's kind of that methodology of, like, tell me what got you here. Like, what is this behavior? What was these actions that were happening? And then the channel or campaign specific data. And you're saying you kind of were able to bring all that together through a multi-touch attribution. Can you break that down a little bit more for me?
Yeah. So from the behavioral side, it really encapsulate, the things that I clicked on from an ad. So what brought me to site, for example, right? And that's a marketing touch, but it's a user behavior. This ad caused me to click.
That's right.
Then there's all the behaviors that I have on site. So, did I look at a blog, or did I expand a FAQ, or did I, look for times where it's possibly available for me to interact with SDR, whatever those might be. So
Yeah.
you're not getting into really granular behaviors. Now, yeah, I think I made that distinction, but I think they both kind of play together, right? And
Absolutely.
when I start getting into my thoughts on attribution in general, it's okay, we've got this channel data and we can use models around that to figure out, well, which of these touches resulted in the outcomes that we're interested in. And we can go on a tangent on, directionality versus looking at this as, generally accepted accounting principles. It's not double entry, accounting. And that's why I think those two sets of data work really well together, because I think the attribution helps folks really sort of understand the direction and what's working. And then when you want to start getting a little bit granular, you can sort of dig into that beneath that level. The folks that we are seeing do this, well, what are some of the behaviors associated with that? How can we use those to either optimize the experience and the journey, but also feed that back into how we run our campaigns? And it's that flywheel of constantly optimizing and taking what we learn as we go through and run it back. And I know you just made that point about self-reported attribution. I think we're moving to this phase of triangulation, if you will. So using a lot of different models, different types of data to just be more effective at what we're doing, especially given how much more important it is now to be efficient with your spend. This is a huge topic in DTC, but I mean, in the B2B space, it's just the same, right? We got to be efficient. The days of just throwing money to grow is a little bit behind us.
That's right. We have we're going to get into the data side of it. But we really do have so much information at our fingertips. Even smaller organizations still, like, you have way more data at your fingertips than you did 10 years ago.
Absolutely.
Like, and so to just continue to throw money at things. So what I'm seeing often is people are commenting of like, oh, we stopped spending on our ad platforms and we still hit our numbers and this and that. And I think that's somewhat of a fallacy, because it's like, well, how big is your brand? How well established are you? Like, some of that ad spend could have helped you get there to become more recognizable. So to stop spend and then still like say, oh, we did just fine. It's like, well, yeah, but there's a lot of other factors that are involved in that.
I mean, I think that goes to the concept of incrementality, right? I mean, I want to spend not to maintain necessarily the same customers, but to bring new customers. I think we saw a lot of that with, reduced spend in areas like branded search and so forth. I mean, there's enough case studies. I think Airbnb was the one that was going around for a while. But I think there's a few different examples of that. So if I'm putting my money, I want to get new customers. I want to grow my customer base. So I think that's a big part of it as well.
Yeah,
Adding to the triangulation, if you will, another means to identify what's working.
Yeah, and I think that's to your point of new customers that, like, when platforms get established, and I didn't think we'd go there today, but like with TikTok, you're seeing it in the B2B space. I don't know if you're seeing in the D2C space, but it's interesting because there's customers that are there that you have not reached. And so it's like, yeah, let's pump some money. And I think it's kind of fun. I think it's cool. Like, to be honest, like, yeah, stop some spend on Google and put it over here and see what happens. Like, I'm not opposed to it by any means. Like, meet people where they're at because they're humans. They're not robots. And so like, what platforms are they on? What are they using? And try to, engage with them in some capacity.
Totally. I think brand identities are changing also a little bit. The old days of, that structured white looking page, with your text and like the excessive marketing speak and so forth. It's shifting a little bit. People are realizing that or marketers, I think, are realizing a lot that people are spending their time on TikTok and LinkedIn and so forth. And standing out is now becoming more difficult. So just like it is in the DTC space, they've got some humor and some, exciting ways of getting people's attention. You got to cut through. And as these platforms have just exploded, there's just less attention to grab. Um, so if you're not, one of those massive incumbents and you're trying to kind of make a name for yourself and sort of cut through some of that noise, you can do some goofy things. And maybe
Yeah.
you wouldn't call them goofy, but TikTok, I think my perspective or my
Is
perception
yeah.
of it is definitely a
I
lot
think
of.
it's a good testing ground. People are able to like test a little more of what is where they wouldn't probably test in other areas that can be goofy. I agree with that. And I enjoy it. So
I had this conversation with my co-founder a few times. It's like the decision makers have kind of grown up over the last few years, and a lot of maybe the first folks, let's say in the B2B space, that are maybe doing the review for their management. I, I don't remember how to even put them in the millennial X whatever. That
yeah.
stuff never made sense to me. But based on that age group, that's where they're at. That's where their attention is. So why not meet them where they are?
Yeah. Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
and on a side note with TikTok, I mean, we did see. I mean, it's worked really well for a lot of brands on the organic side as much as on the paid side. There were
Absolutely.
times where all of a sudden you'd see these massive spikes in traffic and so forth, and go, where'd that come from? Dig into it, and you'd see something went a little bit nuts on TikTok.
How do you dig into it with TikTok? And this will be a kind of a segue into managing data and data streams and what all that looks like. So is that I don't know anything about it. Is that like an open API where you're just able to like pull like
Yeah, I
any of
mean,
the
there's
traffic?
two sides to it. Obviously, you can look at your reporting in TikTok, but from the perspective of the brands that we'd work with, all of a sudden you see a spike on, just say, a traffic metric, and then you go, oh, well, where did that come from? Obviously, you dig into your reports. I mean, it's pretty much a layer down. It's not really,
Yeah.
it's not buried, and you see where that traffic has originated from. And just from that perspective, you know that there's some attention going on.
Okay.
Does that translate to sales? I mean, these are more complex steps
So
to investigate, but just, well, what's that anomaly of traffic for this last 24 hours? A lot of times it was something that went a little berserk on TikTok.
TikTok, yeah. That's fun. So let's get into the data piece and what you're doing with Lassoo and what all that looks like. Because for those who have listened to this podcast for some time, my thoughts around data and data silos and what I think the future is. Like when I used to ask early on, like, what's the future of multi-touch attribution or marketing attribution? And it was always about AI and machine learning. But the reality is, if you do not have a good data structure, those things are useless to you,
Yeah,
right? Like it has to run off of something. It has to be able to process against that hard data set. And if you have not figured out your data yet, as far as how to manage it, how to properly store it, you're going to really struggle to get to the future of what AI is going to be able to offer you. Whether it's multi-touch attribution or not, it's
right.
AI is going to offer you based upon the data that it can run against.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, I think our motivation with Lassoo as we've evolved is that what we found is that as much as we would offer a lot of the capabilities and reporting on our multi-touch attribution models, there were larger orgs that really just wanted the data that we were able to collect. So whether that's the marketing touches and then how we bucket that data in terms of the channels and so forth, along with that behavioral data, and just to be clear, with our product, we collect all behavioral data that happens without a lot of complex instrumentation. So you get this hose of data, and a lot of organizations would basically ingest that and then run their own models on it, whether
Yeah.
that was on touch points, whether that was on-site behavioral data, combination of both, obviously. So that now you've got this corpus of data that you can then go and use in a variety of different ways. As AI builds on that, I mean, these are going to be machine learning models anyways, that a lot of these orgs are going to, they'll push it out into Snowflake or whatever, wherever they want to use that data. It, like you said, it's got to be well structured. It's got to be usable. can't be junk, so that you can go in and actually do something with it. And again, we've seen people using that data within their machine learning models forever. So, I mean, has it been used for AI? It has been used for AI for a while.
Yeah.
It's just the conversations tends to be about, can I just talk to a chat box and get something out of
That's
it?
right. Yeah, I think that's what most people think. And honestly, I don't think that's a bad aspiration, right? Of like, we're seeing that with even media mix modeling
Mhm.
tools where it's able to run against the data that you have and say, and you basically ask, if I spin this in this channel, what's the outcome? And then it
Yep.
spits out a graph or it spits out a number for you. And so it's getting there to where it's just very consumable. It's making the individual not have to be a data scientist to be able to understand it. They can just immediately consume it. So an executive can go in and consume it. Whoever can go in and consume the data in a very easy manner.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the end game or the goal or where people want to go. I think there's a lot of steps in between to
Yeah.
make that a reality, and I think people are working on that. Um, and there, like I said, there are definitely a lot of steps in between, but that's the exciting part. And I think you kind of nailed it on the head with who those users are going to be that are asking those questions. Executives that have complex, well, somewhat complex questions. Heads of marketing and so forth. I think there's still going to be a role for the data scientists, obviously,
Yes.
the data engineers, the folks in there that are doing the plumbing to make it seem like it's working so smooth.
Yeah.
Um, but I think hopefully to that, it alleviates some of the ticket culture mentality that the data teams have to live with. I
Yeah.
think that seems to bog them down from being able to do some of this exciting stuff that we're talking about. So that I think is the exciting part of how AI may get in there and help with these orgs and the data that they've got.
Yeah, and to circle back to what we talked about earlier with behavior and like channel or campaign reporting and the distinction that was made, and yet they're the same. That I think is, I want to call that out. I want to get your thoughts on it because yes, the executive can at some point get to a place where they can type in the question, they get an answer, but it's all about the piping, right? If this was piped a certain way to lead to a specific answer, right? That could impact you, right? So if it's all marketing piping and no sales piping, that's an
Right.
impact. Or if all of the web traffic data is associated to somehow all marketing effectiveness, so all that piping is in place, well, that answer is going to be very different. And so I to your point, you're still going to need a data scientist. You're still going to need someone who truly understands attribution to where they can run different models against it. They can do all these things. Like, yeah, we want to have that accessibility and that ease of use, but I'm not the believer that AI is going to take over all these jobs. I think it's going to make people have to escalate their expertise and their knowledge.
Right.
But there's going to be a need for that because the executive is going to come in and say, "Hey, I got this from our chat bot that says this for marketing." And then the multi-touch attribution person or the attribution guy is going to say, well, maybe like we also have to consider XYZ because of this is how this data looks, right?
Right.
Like we have to be really cautious with it because we're still dealing with humans at
Yeah.
the end of the day, right? It's like these data points are helpful, but we still have to understand like what's the human nature behind a lot of this.
Yeah, I mean, you still got to pull in the data from the different sources that they live in. Otherwise, you only have, like you said, if you're just looking at some marketing data, you obviously don't have a full view. So there's that engineering effort and the setup effort, and then there's the context around understanding it. So, can you run a model on touches and whether view throughs or not? This is another tangent on marketing attribution we can go down. Um, but what's the context of that? Is
Yeah.
there a model in there? Who built the model? How does the model look? Obviously, that associated with the data that's collected. What are those inputs in that model? How is it built? Let's assume that we agree on that. Even when I get a report or I get something out, interpreting it from a set of numbers, sort of at the high level, and maybe not understanding how it got there, still going to result in going back to maybe not the source, but the data scientist to help make sense of it. And to that point, one of the things that we see a lot is you have you know, you're presenting these results, this report, let's call it, your attribution view, your attribution report. That often circles back to the questions of, well, okay, what do I do with this? Or how do I leverage this? What's the next step to take off of that? This is what we're seeing. What should we do? This is where, you know, the data folks, the people that understand the numbers and what's happening behind it, end up being leaned back on.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and to your point earlier, also, you mentioned that, with your previous company, you used game theory to run these numbers and things of that sort. So again, like the questions that these AI models are built upon are these different theories,
mhm.
right? Like there's still so much human involvement behind it, of machine learning models and all of this. And I think those who live in it, like yourself, understand that. But those who just hear AI immediately assume like the machine's taking over, Will Smith's going to have to help save us, right? Type of mentality from the end of the world. And that's just not, that's not the case, right? And there's still a lot of involvement. There's still a lot of engagement behind the scenes of those who are building and developing these things. And you're like, to your point, you're going to need someone who understands these different theories to say, yeah, this is the best one for us. Because I've talked to other people that are running AI and they use a different theory behind their attribution with that. And again, it's far outside the realm of what my mind can think about and process.
Right.
Maybe
Well,
one
I,
day
I
I look at
think
there, but it's interesting.
I think one of the things that we always saw in the past. So you know, a data-driven model that assigns weighting based on just the touches that happen, right? So on the
Yeah.
data, you run a model on.
Yeah.
You still always have people that come back and go, well, can we adjust this weighting or can we adjust that? Or, you know, there's the objective, I think, of a data-driven model or AI model or machine learning model, whatever we want to call them, is really about eliminating some of that bias and getting sort of people's opinions and thoughts out of it as much as possible and leveraging the data that's been collected. Um, so, you know, with a model like that we implemented with TrialFire, there's still always those questions. And you're justifying why a model like this makes sense versus a heuristic model. And you know, there's still always a little bit of pushback on it because people have their intuitions and their opinions and so forth. And, you know, just moving to an AI model or something that's served to you via chatbot, I don't think is going to change that.
Yeah.
People are still going to go back and go, well, I want to understand how this AI model was trained. Who's responsible for it? Do they actually know what they're talking about? Or, you know.
Well, have you heard, this is a very big tangent, but the challenge of AI is I think is a good one. So there was generated like early chat GPT and things of that sort, and it's still a challenge. The most simplest form is if you ask chat GPT to repeat a specific statement, at some point the system begins to break and it tries to run it out, like it tries to change the statement or tries to create a new statement, even though all you've done is ask it to repeat. And the same thing has happened when you ask it to, I think that it was like generating images, and it was just like these cartoon characters, and it was supposed to be like them chasing each other in a circle, right? So like this playful thing. And then at some point it shifted, and the pictures began to change and everything because AI is trying to change it. It doesn't have this idea behind it. So there's flaws in it, is what I'm trying to get at. It's just, which is really fascinating, but something like, which seems like such a simple prompt to repeat something, right? To run a model against something and make it repetitious, right? Um, so, but Michael, thanks for being on today. I really enjoyed this conversation. I've enjoyed getting to talk with you just about these different aspects. I've learned a ton from you, and I know others will as well. So I appreciate you being on Attribution Time.
With pleasure.